Yeah, so I'm going to start by just saying something briefly about practice research. And I know from seeing some of the participants today that many of you will probably be familiar with this. But it's important, I think, as one of our methods that we use within our research. It is a methodology. In other words, practice is how the research questions are answered, how the new insights and knowledge are generated, and how the research is disseminated through practice. So it is a valid mode of research. However, those of you coming from the area of the creative arts are probably aware that despite decades of debates about practice research, there's still questions around the place of practice in research. So whilst it's core to many disciplines, such as engineering, law, medicine, and so on, in the arts humanities, we've still struggle a little bit in many ways to make the case for why practice is valid as a research inquiry, even though it is core to so much of what we do. And I think one of the challenges of practice research is that it often escapes citation conventions, and so it disappears too quickly. It's hard to access, particularly if it's live work, such as performance work and so on. Or it is limited in how it can be accessed due to copyright or other issues, which may of course be related to ethics, that prohibit its wider distribution. However, I think practice research is a methodology that many of us in the field of creative arts adopt and can lead to high quality research outputs and can be core to participatory research as well. And I've just put on my slide here, some of you may be familiar with the Practice Research Advisory Group, which I'm part of, and we produce two I hope, useful reports, which give a lot of information around where we are now with practice research and some of the sort of pointers towards how we can do better in that field of practice research. And it's openly available, this report, through the British Library, or two reports now through the British Library. So I've put together a number of words here in this slide: co-production, participatory research, co-creation, co-design, because I think in the arts, and dance in particular, that there's a lot of crossover between those areas. They all have very similar properties. All of them honour the knowledge, experiences and contributions of those who are partners in the research, which may mean professional artists, it may mean community groups, it may mean audiences. In Kate's case, it was children and many others, as well as other researchers. And in the arts and in dance, in my field of dance, the borders often between the research community and the professional practice community and audiences tend to be very porous. And by that, I mean that many researchers also identify as artist practitioners, and so are deeply concerned with those that are in the professional, deeply connected, sorry, with those who are working in the professional arts sector and with their audiences. So there's a lot of crossover there. And these relationships can be very productive and can be built on existing awareness of different working methods and on trust, which is important. And this can mean that researchers have easier access to a particular community or a setting, as the researcher is already part of that community. However, that closeness does mean establishing important ground rules to ensure appropriate distance and to mitigate bias, and to ensure mutual trust. I keep using that word trust, and I think it is important. And there are also important considerations about what those working methods might be to ensure that those involved are protected and that expectations are clear and transparent, so that the work is carried out responsibly and respectfully. So what does that mean, working respectfully in participatory research? So in the arts sector, artists and artists organisations are often working on very slim budgets with scarce resources. And that work can feel very precarious, particularly in current times where there are limited funds for the arts. It's probably true in other sectors, of course, as well. So researchers, of course, we can often access research funding either from external funders or internally from our institutions. And it's important, and this has come up in the previous session, to recognise the labour involved in expecting artists or anybody to participate in research and to pay them accordingly. And funders need to know that that is important too. And I was glad to hear what Kate said earlier, because I do think funders, and particularly HRC, which is also my primary research council, is very alive to that now and is very keen to see proper payment made for anybody who's contributing to research. And as Kate said, as a reviewer myself, I'm always looking for recognition from the principal investigator, from the research team, that they're recognizing the need to pay for that labor that's part of that research. So care does need to be taken to identify and discuss mutual benefit. It should be beneficial to and supportive of the artists and the organisations, and not only serve the needs of the researchers and the research organisation. And that mutual benefit may mean the participants learn more about their working processes, they can gain new skills, new insights, new information about their audiences perhaps, and it can be a support for their wider work. And I think what's also important is about the role of advocacy in this. It can be that this sort of research can be useful for making the case for why the work is important. It can put pressure on funders. It can evidence for why the work is important. And I think this is part of why the funders have actually made some changes, because they're recognizing the good work that's coming out of this field of participatory research. And by extension, I think it also helps the case for the funder to show the broader value of investment in this kind of research to central government and so on. So it's a win-win for everybody, hopefully. So what might that mean in practice? At core, well, it's research that is conducted with and not on people and participants. It's usually qualitative focus and the methods that many will be familiar with. It involves those who are affected by a challenge perhaps or an issue and should bring about some kind of positive change. Other kinds of methods can be useful, for example, and I know Kate gave some lovely examples that aren't involving writing, and it can be about sort of creating journals, diary notes, other kind of visual ways of documenting experiences and so on. And the key is to ensure that the assumption of who benefits and positive change is rooted in the real needs of those who participate and not dictated or determined by the researcher alone. Importantly, the participants should not be seen as subjects or at worst objects of study from which data is generated for analysis and recommendations, but rather they are co-researchers who are involved in the methods of analysis and are fully involved in determining any outcomes and recommendations. And we had wonderful examples from Kate of that. It can be effective as a method when it involves those who are seldom heard in other research methods and those who tend to otherwise be marginalised. One concern, though, is that the research may not arrive at any kind of concrete outcomes and recommendations, so those should not be forced or exaggerated. But on the positive side, it can be stimulating for everyone, leading to further partnership working, and it can lay the ground to some more extended research, providing the resources are available. So we've heard a lot about ethical matters, so I won't dwell too long on this, but it is important, of course, to ensure that the research is carried out with full consent and clarity about who owns the research that emerges. And this is not just about procedural ethics, but it's about what ethics means in practice. And as with Kate, you know, I'm always discussing what ethics means, because that it can mean very different things in different contexts. So it's a point of discussion and debate rather than simply a process we need to go through. It does, of course, mean being aware of individual needs, and particularly if working with vulnerable participants, so avoiding extractive methods for collecting research data. So the research is truly collaborative from the start. And I think it's important to be aware of different economical structures and time frames, particularly in my work working with artists. A research project may run over a very lengthy period, so scheduling that co-participation activity may not fit easily with artists who tend to have to work more flexibly, with more agility, and may have to make shifts to working practices at short notice. So part of the consideration about how to carry out the research is how to build in flexibility, as well as being responsive to the reality of what time means for those working in professional practice. A Gantt chart we're all familiar with, it may work for a research team, but planning over a long period can be a difficult commitment for artists and organizations. So assuming a long-term commitment to a study can be challenging. And an hour of researcher time may be very different from an artist's hour of time. And it may be that artists and organizations are less interested in, for example, co-authoring, but it shouldn't be assumed that the intellectual property lies with the researcher alone. So we have to have clarity about what generates through the research and what happens to that research, and to consider different modes of dissemination, because dissemination, we have some lovely examples from Kate in there, but assuming that artists, organizations want to get involved in kind of academic publishing may or may not be appropriate. Looking at things like trade press, blogs, podcasts, and so on can be much more accessible and mutually beneficial. So I'm going to talk now about one example of a first phase of a project that I've been working on. We're about to start the second phase, funded through UKRI, the Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub. And these are images from the first phase, and two of our dancers who are working with us, Tanya Earhart and Whatley O'Brien. And this project involves participatory research methods. It's based primarily on exploring the experience of these disabled professional dancers who happen to all be female, who are prosthesis users, and how they may have more control of the aesthetic design of their prosthesis, which, as we discover, can perform different functions such as costume as well as a different artistic expression, and not just be a tool or technology to normalize their body. And the production after that of 3D printed prostheses. The research, which was carried out in collaboration with the university colleagues at the University of Nottingham, involved introducing the dancers to digital processes that were new to them, such as motion capture, 3D design, and the researchers who are experts in operating those technologies. That involved working with computer scientists and engineers, as well as those of us who are dance researchers. So this was an interesting project for building new skills, but importantly, at the root of this, of course, was building trust between us and the dancers. What was so important is that the dancers and their particular idiosyncratic and individual practices were core to the research, and hence was why participatory research was the method we needed to use. The research derives from their expert practice. Their practice is researchful, but here I want to make a subtle distinction. The research is not practice research as a research methodology, but it's drawing on research for practice as core to the process. So its focus was on considering what it meant for the dancers to design their own prosthesis, what their needs are, for what purpose, and how those needs are determined by them rather than by the design or the engineering process. And core to the project was working with a sector of the professional dance community that is, or at least feels, and probably is, marginalized. Their needs are often not in focus. So what did that mean in practice? We needed to ensure that the needs of the research was clear, it was understood and agreed, and it met the needs of the dancers as well. We needed to think about how to make a democratic or a safe space. A university environment can be quite alienating for those who aren't familiar with that space, so we needed to think about working in their space. The gender divide. Our colleagues at Nottingham were male, the dancers are female. It can lead to unspoken but felt power relationships that we needed to acknowledge. We needed to think about how to organize time. We were thinking about the theory of crip time, working on dancer time, and thinking how to set up the space so it was more familiar as a working environment. Simple devices like all of us sitting on the floor was a way of equalizing the environment. We allowed the dancers to lead the discussions, giving space for their experiences and reflections to lead rather than what was observed by us. We asked questions that are open-ended to encourage their feedback, however relevant or otherwise. We needed to rethink modes and methods of our user testing, our working protocols and settings. We needed to rethink traditional design assumptions, thinking the dancer was not performing to the technologist who is observing and driving the computer program. We needed to encourage them to believe that they are real stakeholders in the research by respecting their lived experience. They, after all, are the experts. And that meant also considering appropriate language, how to speak about the work. There is already a level of trust between ourselves and the dancers as dance experts, but other figures, other authority figures can feel rather scary at times. So we didn't need to translate specialist language where it was needed. And needed also to acknowledge that their participation ranges from informing the research to taking more of a leadership role in shaping the research and the process of shared decision-making. The dancers were, after all, co-researchers. And we did invite them to co-present and co-author where appropriate, acknowledging the labour involved. And we did pay them proper artist rates. And these are artist rates based on what they earn through their artist work. So that was really important. It was built into the budgeting, and we made sure that everything was covered appropriately. So what did the research reveal through this participatory method? Well, it revealed that traditional design and technology methods do not often consider the lived experience of those who are testing equipment and so on. The research also challenged some of the orthodoxies of methods that focus on data capture. So for just a brief example, using a motion capture suit, which is traditionally designed for bodies that have 4 limbs. So then how do you then rethink the whole process of motion capture? Algorithms that we were drawing on tend to have based on a normative assumption of human motion. So all of those working protocols needed to be adjusted. The research also revealed what a prosthesis is for those who use them. And this set up implications for the 3D modeling and printing. The dancers themselves had an opportunity to think about their relationship differently with their prosthesis as a creative partner, as a costume, and so not only a functional device. And it did provide some agency in their ongoing relationship outside of this project with their prosthetists and other health professionals that support them. And then normative methods and traditional power structures in that dance technology interface were challenged and to some extent rethought. It led the research team, all of us, to a greater commitment to diversity in what actually can be quite a male and ableist research environment. The dancers did have new skills and were able to share their outcomes to their communities and to attract new audiences. And it showed, of course, the benefit to all of us of the value and purpose of participatory research. And this is just my last slide, just to show you a few more images from this project. And I want to thank Feng Zhu for these images. He was one of the team members. And you will see here just 2 publications that have emerged from this research, and actually they are academic publications, which the dancers were fully involved in their voices. It was really important for us that their voices were fully included, so they are part of the authoring team for these 2 publications, and they were very happy to contribute. And then the link at the bottom is simply to a very beautiful film by one of the dancers, made with one of the dancers, Whatley O'Brien, which is a film which focuses on the prosthetic. So it's a really interesting example of a film project that came out of some of, not directly out of our work, but out of this work about thinking about the prosthetic in relation to dance. Thank you. I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. Really interesting to learn more about your approach, how to explore the complex challenges and power dynamics and other considerations involved, and how to come out with solutions that are equitable and leading to rigorous research. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, we've had lots of interesting questions and we've got about 10 minutes for those. So without further ado, okay. An answer attendee asked, they're interested in what you said about the outcomes of research not always being clear initially. And they ask if that's a challenge if you receive funding for research.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. Of course, those of us involved, when you put your bid together, you are looking towards potential outcomes and outputs and so on. But I think also it's important to recognize, and if it's there clearly in the bid and the proposals you put together, that this is something which is more speculative in a way, and the outcomes can't be overly predicted, and new things might emerge that you weren't expecting. And that's something that we've come across many times, is that what you thought might emerge takes a bit of a different route, and more interesting things sometimes emerge. I don't think that that's ever been a problem. Of course, the funder does want to see that that good things emerge from the research, but I don't think there's any sense that they are. I've never had an issue, put it like that, with a funder saying, well, you said you were going to do this and you did this, because I think what we come up with is often more interesting than what we might have predicted when we started the work. So it's making sure that the proposal, as you put it together, is placing emphasis on this participatory part of the research method. And by definition, therefore, what emerges isn't necessarily predictable.
Thank you, it's really helpful. I think you've already been answering a related question from Joseph, who's asked how you can document and disseminate a non-concrete outcome to funders, partners and institutions, and if you ever had pushback. I think part of your answer might be that if you kind of let people know in advance the way the research is being done, but are there other approaches you can use to avoid kind of pushback when you're in the dissemination of your outputs?
Yeah, no, and also I think, again, I think funders are much more open to much more diverse modes of dissemination now. And yes, if you have developed some data which is then you can make openly accessible, that's excellent, and has sort of broader impact. But I think my experience, at least, is that funders are getting much more interested in diverse forms of dissemination, and after all, again, I think it's part of the way in which funding is going. It's acknowledging the value of working much more directly with participants, and that therefore the research we do has to have benefit to them. So actually just publishing in academic papers doesn't necessarily have the reach and the impact into the communities that we've been working with and that are so important to the research that we're doing. So I think we do need to think imaginatively about all of those different modes that we can, and often they come from the communities we're working with, working with themselves. They're telling us better modes of dissemination, and I think funders are really excited by that, actually.
Yeah, I think that ties in what I've heard well. Thank you so much. Dawn asks, if participants should be seen as co-researchers, what does this mean for traditional avenues for obtaining consent to participate? Information sheet, consent forms. If they're co-researchers, how do you navigate the issue of consent?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think Kate talked about this as well. I mean, it is, we must get consent, of course, and we have to follow our institutions' methods of gaining ethical approval and so on, and going through and making sure that we're doing everything ethically correctly and morally correctly. And I think, again, very often one can author that consent, the information sheets, the participant information sheets, and the consent sign-off forms and so on. But I think it can be in a negotiated forum. I really support the idea that rather than we go in and we sit down and we share the paperwork and we try and encourage everybody to sign it, that we talk first about what does ethics mean in this work? What are we talking about in terms of ethics? And how are we going to deal with any ethical issues that might come up? And part of that is about negotiating and navigating the requirements of our institutions, of course, and making sure that we're doing things correctly and properly. But I think it's about also bringing our participants into that process of thinking through ethics. The difficulty there sometimes is timing. because of course,
Yeah.
at what point do we start the research? And I've had some challenges with that, because I've wanted to spend time with people, getting to know people. And of course, sometimes some really interesting things emerge in those early conversations. And you think, oh, that's wonderful information. I want to sort of hold that. I want to record that. I want to capture that. But we have to balance that with with what can become quite a barrier to open conversation when you start producing pieces of paper and start to sort of ask people to sign them off. So it's always a balance. How do we negotiate this really tricky field of ethics to make sure that we are all working absolutely soundly in terms of ethics, but without it becoming a barrier to the kind of collaborative research and the co-research that we really want to do.
Thank you, that's really helpful. A final question from, actually a related question with Theo, an anonymous attendee. When participants are based, we're talking about pay for artists and other participants, if they're based in a country where pay is very low in comparison to the UK, how do you navigate that? If participants are on benefits and therefore payments may impact on their ability to receive what benefits they receive, how do you navigate those kind of complexities?
Those are all really good questions. Yeah, the issue around benefits is really tricky, because, yeah, it bluntly on a case-by-case basis, so that you have to have that conversation to work out how to do it. We found some workarounds, dare I say it, because particularly if you're working sometimes with disabled artists, as I've been working a lot with disabled dancers over many years, that it might have a a real impact on the benefits they receive if they're then part of a project where we wish to pay them. So we're having to find workarounds. It's not an easy solution. In very simple terms, if there's ever a simple answer to this, we always look at what are correct artist rates, and that is our baseline, and that's what we want to offer always. Sometimes we're able to work with a company, and those of us in institutions know that paying freelancers, those who are I mean, the processes we have to go through to pay independent workers is complicated enough anyway. And when there are other added constraints on the kind of pay they might receive, we have in the past worked with organizations where those artists might have a connection with, so that that funding goes through the organization and the organization can pay the participants. So we've found a series of workarounds, if I'm honest. I've not worked with artists from overseas, if I'm honest. There are other issues there around kind of visas, and we get into other kind of difficult territories there. But I also have to say that in my own institution, we have a brilliant research support team who find their way around some of these really tricky issues. And because we do a lot of work with the artist community, they've built up some really good expertise around working with people who are on very different kind of working relationships, whether they're freelance, independent, on benefits, and so on. So we've got some good expertise, but it does take time to build that up. And I am very grateful to my team, my support team, for that.
Yes, I think the role of professional services staff and other people in this type of research cannot be underestimated. Sarah, that was fabulous. Thank you so much.